Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you guys again. And I welcome you all to another episode of Space in Africa's webinar series titled Satellite Manufacturing in Africa for Global Markets. My name is Mustafa Iderawumi, a senior analyst at Space in Africa, and I'm truly honored to be your host today. So despite the global boom in satellite manufacturing, African companies still face a distinct challenge in scaling due to economic and business development hurdles. So we have some African manufacturers that are shutting down their operation due to insufficient funding for operational costs and also R&D investment. We also have some companies that are experiencing delays, prolonged delays, I might add, in developing and launching their first commercial space product. And also we have a couple of companies that relied heavily on government projects at their inception and are now struggling to expand their client base or even attract commercial space investments or even commercial customers. And that has also led some of these companies to closures. However, we have several success stories of companies that are thriving and doing relatively well in Africa and are also able to expand their business operation to other regions, including Asia, Oceania, the US, and all of that. So our discussion today is very simple. So we're just going to look at insights from some of these companies that are doing relatively well, that have been able to take advantage of small satellite revolution. They've been able to navigate supply chain issues. They've been able to diversify their customer base and also been able to balance the public-private partnerships to grow their business. But before we go into it, let me introduce our speakers for today. So first I have Anna Mialo. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Samara Sense. Also, I have James Barrington Brown. He's the Group Chairman of New Space Systems. I also have Oliver Muto. He's the Principal at 615 VC. And last but not least, I have Mike Alekeni. He's the CEO of Keep Space Satellite Systems. So before we start, let me give a quick rundown of today's proceeding. So first, I'm going to direct some questions to our speakers to drive conversations into different thematic areas. Then afterwards, we'll entertain some questions from the audience. So this is where I usually like to say a very big thank you to everyone that has tuned in today. Thank you very much for your support. And as we progress in the discussion, please feel free to drop whatever questions or whatever comments you have in the Q&A section. And when we get to that part, we're going to take as much questions as the time permits. So now let's dive into it. James, I'm going to ask you the first question. So what most people here would be really interested to know would be how, as an African manufacturer, you've been able to expand your business, to America, to European and Oceania market. So the question I have for you is, for companies like this, what are the things that they must navigate regarding the regulatory orders that pertains to each of these regions? So how have you been able to navigate these regulatory issues? And are there any particularly challenging regulatory restrictions for companies such as yours?
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the discussion that we're going to have. On the regulatory side, it's actually pretty unidirectional in that we have to comply with export compliance from South Africa outwards. So people are concerned with things like US ITAR, but that only applies to technology coming out of the States. So actually, I mean, apart from being a lot of bureaucratic paperwork, there are two different organizations within South Africa you have to get approvals and licenses for. Once you've sorted out that regulatory side, it is fairly easy, and it's just repeating for each customer, each nation to get the paperwork right. More of the issue is how are the different cultures that you're trying to sell to. So I mean, space is by definition is global, it's an international business, but different cultures, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going to be stereotyping a little bit here, but different cultures work in different ways. So in the US, it's very transactional. You've got a product, they want to see a data sheet, they get a price, and they'll do a deal. Europe's more of a sort of partnership type arrangement. Again, I'm summarizing here. Asia, it's quite a lot into trust and building relationships over the long term. And so you then have to respond to the market in different ways. So in the US, we have a US office, we have a US accent on the sales guys, and it's a purely US owned organization. In Asia, we tend to work through agents. So speaking the same language, understanding the cultures, very much personal visits. And Europe is direct sales mostly out of either the South African office or our European office. So it's not really a regulatory thing. It's more of an understanding cultures and how people buy.
All right, thank you for that. Anna, you're going to take my next question. Just like James, you've also been trying to expand your business and have successfully done that. And you also opened a new facility in France earlier this year. So another question I'd like to ask you away from the regulatory landscape is, what advice would you give to other African companies that are looking to do the same?
So I think advice that I can give if you want to expand into different markets is to understand, know where you can and should capitalize. Each region has its own benefits. So understanding how these benefits can be exploited is important. For instance, Europe has rich infrastructure, especially when it comes to manufacturing of large systems, which we don't necessarily have access to in Africa. So looking at which benefits in which region brings, or which benefit each region brings is important, as well as ensuring that you don't lose the competitive benefits that you get from being an African company, right? Because we need to understand that part of the reason that we're so successful here is because we're African companies. Diversification also unlocks funding benefits and contractual benefits. A lot of programs require you to have regional operations to participate. So it's important to factor all of these things in and to optimize your regional presence depending on where you can gain the most benefit.
All right, thank you very much. Mike, please, I'm going to ask you the next question. So this is also something introductory. So and it's also very critical to business success. This is supply chain and logistics. So what exact challenges so I wanted to be very focused on like the African market right now. So what challenges do African satellite manufacturers face regarding supply chain and logistic issues? And how have you been able to manage these challenges to meet global demands?
Thanks for the question. I think it's changed over time. Of course, during COVID times, supply chain was a hot mess. So getting the simplest electronic chips was very difficult. Getting processors and stuff was very difficult. But that's eased off now, and that's kind of stabilized. But I guess that's a challenge that everyone faced globally. That's not unique to Africa. I think most probably the biggest challenge is on machining, surface treatment, those kind of services, manufacturing services. For the space industry, the quality levels that you require on these things, let's say for machining, the quality levels, surface finish levels, cleanliness levels are obviously higher than for other industries and slightly unique in that way. And typically the processes that goes with that quality is slightly more stringent. So not all machine shops in your country will be able to machine to the quality standards that you want, for instance. So we've had to significantly upskill a lot of the local supply chain. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, NewSpace, KeepSpace, Amira, we've significantly upskilled the machine shops that are available locally. We worked with the guys that were the best, but they weren't necessarily geared for space manufacturing. So we were lucky that we had a good base in South Africa already, because we had some other more military activity which required similar levels of quality and processes. But I think elsewhere in other African countries, it will be a bigger problem being able to get that machining done. And you can outsource these things internationally, but of course it becomes expensive and shipping becomes expensive, and you may lose your competitive advantage. Additional to machining, things like surface finishes. For space, you typically need to use one of a couple of surface finishes that the guys from ESA would be happy with. And there typically aren't a lot of people doing that. It's not difficult to set those shops up, but there aren't necessarily many of them available. I think other services like soldering, for instance, getting people to be able to solder to the right quality levels is something that, once again, we have available here. We've had to upskill, but you won't necessarily have that available everywhere in Africa. Things like testing, I guess you can consider as part of supply chain. If you're outsourcing it, things like qualification testing, vibration facilities, TVAC facilities, those kind of things are only available in countries that typically have an established space industry. So if you're an African country where there is no space industry, those are things you will struggle with. Yeah, I think that's a couple of examples. And a lot of those problems could be overcome with upskilling local supply chain.
All right. Thank you very much. Now to Oliver. So before I ask the question, I just want to give a little bit of context. A lot of companies on this webinar, they are at different stages of their business operation. So I think the best way to just ease into like the investor landscape today would be to ask you this introductory question. So at what stage of development do you believe that African satellite manufacturing companies are most likely to attract VC funds? Is it at the seed, early stage, or even growth stage?
I think just, and again, first thing, I'm not an expert on the African satellite manufacturing industry. I'm based here in the US, so a lot of that has just come from study and from observation. But I think you've done a great job of bringing in some companies that have been successful in the global marketplace. But to answer your question, I think it is obvious that, specific to Africa, I think a lot of that success is coming at sort of a growth phase. If you look at sort of the progression, many of these companies here, in fact, in the panel, have recently, in the last couple of years, been rewarded by investors to expand into global markets, or even, expand there locally. New Space, had investment not too long ago from Horizon Equity Partners for DI Capital. Companies like Dragonfly, in recent years have received, acquisitions or investments. A lot of that is happening because these companies are being successful, are selling products, are building partnerships outside of Africa, and then being successful, and therefore being rewarded by their investors who are looking to expand that success globally. I think what we haven't seen a lot of in Africa yet, I think, is that type of success at a very early stage, which tends to happen more here in the United States and perhaps in Europe, where people are sort of betting on big ideas, and these companies are able to tap into local funding sources to get lots of investment early on. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think, revenue is very important, success in product and success in expansion, very important. And I think that's sort of what we're seeing. And I think that seems to be the blueprint for success when it comes to the African space manufacturing landscape. Yeah.
Mustafa, can I comment on that?
Sure.
Yes.
Related, not exactly on topic, but related. The fact that we have very little money available in the early stages, and that the companies are formed in this money scarce environment, I think is a big part of the success of the of CubeSpace, NewSpace, and Samira sitting on this panel. I think having being born in this money scarce environment makes you do things a lot more efficiently, makes you manufacture things more efficiently, make you put your processes more in place more efficiently. And the major thing is it drives you to get product market fit earlier, because you need to generate cash. So, being in this environment makes that you're focused on what the customer needs and, what the customer is going to be willing to pay for. And I think all three of these companies have been very successful at constantly innovating toward what the market needs. I think a lot of companies being, flooded with cash in the early days, they get a bit comfortable, and I think they very often develop the product that they think the market needs, not necessarily what the market really does.
And you make a good point. I think there's a lot of great focus. If you look at your companies, I think there's a lot of great focus, and that comes from that product customer fit, right? So, Samara Sense, you're doing optical payloads, right? And your company, Mike Alec, is doing the ADCS systems, right? The problem earlier stage companies that have more access to cash get into, they try to do too much, and everybody starts becoming sort of an end-to-end solution, right? And you see a lot of that happening, especially here, even with very small companies, where in day one, they have a product, and day two, there's a little bit of expansion. And just because there's funding available, they initially go into areas maybe they should not get into, and therefore cannot sustain over time. So I agree with you. I think it's great to have that focus. It's great to go after customers, sell them product, and build in that success.
Yeah, I think the only thing where the cash is important in the beginning, and specifically in the space industry, no one's going to buy your thing if you don't have heritage on it, right? You need to have flight heritage. You need to get the thing in space before anyone will buy it. And I think a lot of Africans, I think, they think that because it's an African product, the rest of the world is not going to buy it. But we've proven that's not true. The rest of the world, Europe, US, they're willing to buy from Africa if the product works and it's been in orbit and it's been proven to work, right? So I do think having some cash or a program in the early days to be able to get your stuff into space is important. And I think that's where government in Africa has a huge role to play.
Agreed. I think that's then maybe that is the number one problem for many companies. Not all, but for many companies. Yeah. Specifically here as well is how do I get my product into space and come back successfully and have data and success around that.
And I think VCs are not going to fund that kind of high risk initial launches and stuff. That product de-risking will not be funded by investors. And so I say that's where governments are really important.
Now, to that point, in the States, they sometimes do. So, and that, like I mentioned, can become a problem. I don't think you have that problem in Africa, but that becomes a problem in some geographies where the VCs will fund untested ideas and unproven ideas and continue to fund those. Yeah.
All right. Anna, do you want to add something on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think I agree, you need that heritage, and venture capitalists aren't necessarily willing to take the risk on a product if it doesn't have heritage. But and I think a lot of the companies that sit around the table here have relied on is our heritage know-how in the guys that worked in the legacy and were able to build a name and a reputation for themselves. And you can capitalize on that when it comes to investment, to build that trust and de-risk to de-risk for the investors.
Okay. So let me just take this, what Oliver mentioned, also what Mike and Anna mentioned now. Then I'm going to throw it back to James. James, so the first part is actually getting your product in orbit. So getting the heritage right. And then another part is actually expanding your product into other terrain. Now, the other part, if you'd agree with me, would be actually, if you have a customer, keeping the customers. That's the other part. So this is what will lead me to my next question. You've been able to solve this, so you are suited to answer this question. So New Space Systems have exported products to over 25 countries across 6 different continents, and you have branches in the US, UK, and New Zealand. So the question is, how do you adapt your products and services to meet the specific needs of these global markets? And what strategies have been proven to be the most effective?
Yeah, some of that comes back to the earlier response in terms of different cultures. So using agents where necessary, or doing direct sales, or setting up a remote office so you're close to the customers. There's also a big focus now, especially in Africa, but other areas as well, on localization. So people want you to go and set up a factory in their country. They will only fund technology development if that IP is still owned by the country that's funding it, and is then, generates long-term taxes by generating product in that localization. So that's why you'll see a lot of space companies moving into a number of different regions, both to be closer to the market and also for that grant funding for technology development. On the question of how do you keep the customers, I mean, that's business 101. You have to have good customer service. Well, you have to have good product that works and works for long periods of time in orbit. And that's why the heritage is so important, because the only real proof that your product is good is for it to have flown for the same length of time as your next customer wants to fly it. And most customers want to fly things for 5 to 7 years. So you can't even persuade them that your product can last 5 years until you've got 5 years of heritage, which is typically 8 to 10 years after you've started your company. So they're very long lead times. But yeah, good business support, good product. We've been very good so far. I'm not sure we've lost any customers that have joined us. We specialize in doing larger volumes. So if you're designed into a platform that's going to be what we call a recurrent platform, so it's a modular system that can be used for many different missions, many different payloads. Once you're designed into a system like that, it's quite expensive to be designed out. So as long as you meet the quality, the performance, and the delivery schedules, there is an inertia to not design you out. Getting into that first mission is where the hard sell is. And as Anna-Mia said, some of us have been around in the industry for a little while, have built up our personal heritage as well as company heritage from maybe other programs or other companies. And that really helps to sell. At least you know what you're talking about. Even if the specific product you've got hasn't flown, you can show a demonstration that you understand what the design issues are to make sure it does work for that length of time. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. So Mike, I'm coming back to you. Another critical part of this is the fierce competition with local and much more pronounced the global companies. So the question I have is, like, how exactly have you been able to position yourself against these established global competitors? And much more than that, what advice would you give to other companies on this call that are also looking to compete on global stage? What do they need to get right? What do they need to do? And all of that. Thank you.
I think firstly, get lucky. I mean, you can be as experienced as you want and have as much business knowledge and understanding of the market, whatever. You need to get a break. Everyone around this table got some break at some point, some opportunity. So there's no formula to give you success, but there obviously are some things that we did right and that everyone can do right. But I think personally for me, a relentless pursuit of understanding your customer's need. So really focusing on what the customer needs and making sure that you constantly shape the service that you're offering, the people that you're hiring, the product that you're developing, that you shape everything around serving that customer need. So I do think some of the bigger global companies, they get a bit complacent. I think they've got less pressure to perform, and as I said earlier, in the scarce environment, you really have pressure to make money. You need to generate cash to be able to pay salaries and to grow. And I think that hunger and that need to be successful and generate cash is a big part of why we have been successful against the big global companies. I think the staying efficient, focusing on lead times and cost and those kind of things, and not being too greedy on price, I think is important. But I think it all stems from the same core thing, which is making sure you're trying to solve the customer's need and staying focused on them.
All right, thank you very much. So Anna, we're getting into the money conversation now. So you've been able to raise some significant funding over the years, with the last one being the 30.5 million euros that you raised recently. So the question is, I mean, the conversation has usually been around, the fact that before you raise funding, you're going to tell me if this is right or not. Before you raise funding, you should be able to have your feet on the ground so that the funding does not sort of like throw you off balance.
Mhm.
So the question I have is like, what do you think are the key challenges and opportunities also for private investments in the African new space satellite manufacturing segment? What are the opportunities and challenges, and how can they be addressed? So the point,
Yeah.
the point is like, what are the long-term impacts that increased investment can also have on industry growth? It's
Right.
part
So yeah. So that's the starting with the challenges is I'm gonna start there. I think in Africa, institutional and financial investors don't necessarily understand the commercial space industry. They don't understand the how money can be made, and are less reluctant to take the risk to invest. So a way we were able to get around this is to approach an investor and onboard an investor that focuses on funding space companies. And with that, we had to obviously venture into the European investment pool because that did not exist in South Africa at that point, or we could not find it. And we were able to then find an specific sector investor in the space industry to onboard in our investment round. With that then gave the institutional investors and the financial institutions more backing. We had more backing. We had this technically focused investor that was willing to invest in us, that did the kind of technical due diligence, saw the benefit in it, and with that we were then able to onboard additional investors that were more institutional and financial, that did not necessarily understand the industry as well as the sector specific investor did. So that was a way we worked around it. Specifically for startups, I think, and this was mentioned before by Mike, getting an anchor client helps a lot in creating reassurance for investors. Here, as Mike mentioned, governments can assist. I think also, other industry partners putting agreements and relationships in place with other industry partners can help to get that anchor client discussion going, and with that then onboarding investors. Fortunately for the African space industry, there are more and more investment in the sector. I mean, I think Samira Sense is a good example of that. And as more investment into space on the continent happens, investors will be more informed. They will be less ignorant to the industry and the benefits that can come from the industry. And the industries on the continent that are successful and profitable are examples of and reduce the risk to investors to invest further in Africa.
All right, thank you very much. So Oliver, my next question to you would be like a compound one. So please just bear with me. So I wanted to to paint this picture for our audience, basically. First one, how do you access the current market potential for satellite manufacturing in Africa? So after the assessment, so what factors do you think make this particular sector palatable to venture capitalists such as yourself? What exactly it is about our industry right now that makes it appealing to VC capitalists like yourself? Then the last part would be on the metrics. Are there like specific metrics or indicators that you use to prioritize when considering an investment in a company?
Big question, and many good components to that. You know, I think things that make the African satellite manufacturing industry attractive, I think, first of all, is sort of the success that these companies here at the panel can attest to as well. The fact that they've been around for many years, they have that flight heritage, they have successfully, you know, launched products into markets. They have customers who are happy, and they've been able to expand globally and, you know, do so successfully. I think it's something that obviously becomes very attractive to potential investors. Space is definitely a global marketplace, and once you demonstrate that you can build products that can go into space and stay there for a while, I think that becomes very attractive to customers, and that obviously becomes attractive to investors. So I think that customer success is very important, and, you know, being at that growth phase, you know, I think investors are willing to invest money in sort of in hopes of achieving global expansion, as opposed to, you know, investing in situations that are risky, and, you know, there's technology risk and the product is not being de-risked. So I think the focus on sort of specialization, as well as the customer success and the growth, the many years of being in business and successfully launching products, all of these things are factors for the companies who can do that, obviously, that are going to attract investors. Obviously, they're going to look at some of the more, you know, traditional metrics. They're going to look at team. They're going to look at product. They're going to look at, you know, the market size. Again, all the market sizing numbers are big, in the billions, right? For what, you know, countries and others are planning to spend on going into space. So, you know, I think it becomes an attractive marketplace, not only in Africa, but again, globally. I think finding the right investment partner is key, someone who sort of understands this market. I think Anamia sort of was sort of going in that direction when they went out and found someone in Europe who sort of understood the markets. I think with that specialization, you see the same specialization when it comes to investors. There are a number of firms now who are very focused in this space. I think that's going to be very important, specifically for African companies, where you know, these investors sort of understand the opportunity and are willing to come in and take the risk, because they understand that these companies are building products that have global demand with customers. So I think, you know, in the same way that specialization can be good when you're building product, I think that's also very helpful when you're looking for investors. But I think a lot of the traditional sort of metrics that investors look for come into play. So, you know, are you generating revenue? Is this a product that a market exists for? Are your customers happy with your product? What are the opportunities to sell more product, perhaps outside of Africa? So I think these are questions that will come up, and you know, as is, you know, attested to by the success these companies have, you know, received in way of funding. You know, once they see that, I think you know, the willingness to invest is definitely going to be there. So hopefully that answers that bigger question. You know, one sort of maybe sort of missed you know, opportunity now is sort of early stage. So I think, you know, specifically here in the US or in Europe, you know, some of the innovation, some of the activities driven by earlier stage companies, I think that's something that's still very difficult in Africa. But again, I think, you know, it's good that we're seeing success when it comes to growth stage companies.
I just want to add something that Mike hinted at earlier, which there is a role for government here. I mean, kind of pre-seed. I mean, if a government's not prepared to invest in inverted commas in their industry, then why should an investor look at the same industries? So we mentioned heritage being a really major drawback. I mean, if you have a national mission and you can fly some products on that national mission, then that gives you heritage. That's something that normally government is effectively taking away the risk from the market by supporting that. But there's no point in what I tend to call vanity projects. You go and buy a satellite from some other country and you fly it and you put your flag on it and say, hey, we've got our own satellite. You need to really think strategically and think, okay, let's develop some local technology, which we think there's a market for. Let's fly it, maybe not as a core system, but as a payload on a satellite that you're pretty sure is going to work. And then once that company's got the heritage, then again, government can support with assisting in developing some of the infrastructure, for example. I mean, Mike also mentioned some in test facilities, vibration, thermal vacuum, and that kind of thing is a very big ask for a young company to invest in. It's a very big ask for an investor to come and buy when you're a startup. So those are the areas that government can really help. So I'd say kind of pre-seed, you should also look at government investment.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, Mike, you're going to take my next question. So I think we've talked a little bit about what the companies should do, why they're trying to expand their business operations or even enhance whatever it is that they're doing currently. So talk to me about the things that they should not do. Maybe at the early stage, at the seed stage, at the growth stage. What are some of those things that you've seen happen to other companies that you've understood that companies should not be doing this at different stages in their operation?
That's an interesting question. I think don't overexpand too quickly. I think what a lot of startups do is they hire too many people too quickly. And if we're talking to, this is me talking to African companies where I'm assuming the same kind of resource scarce environment. If you're in the US and you've got this massive VC seed funding and stuff, then oftentimes they want you to be very aggressive and grow the team very quickly and chase that big growth and not miss out on the growth by scaling too slowly. I do think in the type of environment that we're operating in, you need to be very careful on increasing your salary bill too quickly, taking on too many fixed operational costs every month. I think you need to be, I think that's one thing. Be careful not to scale too quickly or spend money too quickly or take on people too quickly. Another mistake I see a lot of companies make is trying to do everything themselves and not partnering efficiently. We've seen so many space companies or guys that want to build satellites that reinvent the reaction wheel. It's just not necessary. There's a whole supply chain. Each person, Asus, Dell, Lenovo, they're not all building their own processors. They're buying an Intel or AMD or now a Snapdragon Qualcomm processor or whatever. But the fact is, you don't need to go build every part of the satellite. There's a whole supply chain that's maturing, that are doing things at scale, that have facilities and equipment that they're sharing the costs with over all customers, where your suppliers are gaining experience on their components from all customers. And when you buy one of their components, you basically buy all of that experience. So starting from scratch and trying to develop your own thing just doesn't make sense. So I think partner, and then linking to that partner thing, not just by buying components instead of building them yourselves, just being careful not to be too secretive about things. What I've seen so many space companies do, it's space and it's strategic and it's kind of secretive, and then they don't share and they don't partner and they're scared to actually work with other companies. We've seen that with so many companies where before you even have a simple conversation with them, they want to sign an NDA, and then you sign the NDA and then you have a conversation and they tiptoe around having an honest conversation and sharing because they're so protective of their IP and their knowledge. I swear, if people had all our designs, they still won't be able to build our component because the IP and the design is not what makes the company and the product. It's the people and the processes and the brand and the know-how and the relationships and the trust. So don't be too secretive and don't think because it's space, it needs to be unique and different. Be collaborative, partner with people, communicate openly, and through that you'll find opportunities.
All right, thank you. So James, I have like a similar question for you. So early on, I think you and Anna mentioned something about having an anchor client, which typically refers to like government in the early stages of business operation. So how do you think businesses can navigate this process? Because again, this is like it's two-sided. For instance, you have on one hand, they actually need that to be able to scale their production rapidly. But on the other hand, if you get too complacent because you're able to secure an anchor client, it might make it hard for some companies to be able to move out of the government zone and be able to get commercial customers. So how do you think companies should navigate that? So that when the government contract, for example, dries up, they are still able to have commercial customers to be able to make their business operational.
Well, yeah, Rule 101, and don't misinterpret what I said earlier about government has a role. Never, ever rely on government. They're completely unreliable as a customer. They delay things, they change their mind, they change specifications, they run out of money and cancel things. So government's not a great customer, but they are a great enabler of that first mission to get heritage and, yeah, maybe supporting you on the infrastructure side. So you have to focus on clients. That's absolutely 101. And that is difficult for Africans, I think, in general, because, again, it's a global market and the biggest market is in the States, which is, well, for a South African, is 24 hours away. Pretty much irrespective of where you're trying to get to in the States. You just have to put in the hard graft. You have to go visit your customer. You have to go to the conferences. You have to have an active social media presence. Yeah, but the website, all those things to trade internationally. And then it's talking to people, building up the partnerships, building up the trust, getting that first small product, supporting them very well, that they're happy with that, they're technically supported well, they get that into orbit, and then they say, okay, we like the way you work, can we buy more stuff from you? And then you're cross-selling from one product to 2 products to 3 products. It takes time. We've been around 11 years now and still building that market share, working on people that we've been talking to now for 5 years.
All right, thank you. Anna, so you're also going to speak to something related to this. But before I ask the question, this is for the audience. Please, if you have questions, you can please drop them in the Q&A box so we can take as much as we can during that section. Thank you. So Anna, this is also you talking about things that companies should not do. But this would now be focused on when they are trying to expand. What are the things that they should not do? Or the things that you've seen other companies do that backfired? Thank you.
So I think I echo a lot of what my colleagues have said. I think one thing that growth is scary, and I'm gonna focus on the human aspect. When you grow your organization, it is vital to understand that your growth will change the company. And as a startup company, you have to be resilient. You have to apply grit and be sometimes a little bit reckless, but also push through to get the job done and get everything done. And as you grow, you have to put things in place. You have to drive the growth forward. At a certain point, you need to understand that you cannot necessarily operate in the same way, and you need to adapt. And the biggest challenge, I think, is keeping that culture and edge that made you that amazing company that succeeded in the first place. At Samira, we pride ourselves on company culture, and I think both NewSpace and CubeSpace pride themselves on their people and the company culture that they've created, and the open way of working. And maintaining that is a big consideration for scaling. Yes, the money, the facilities are important, but your people are the most important part of your organization. Without them, you can't do anything. And keeping that culture in the organization, I think, is the biggest consideration for growth, and something that a lot of companies companies make a mistake and not actually paying attention and putting focus on making sure that you take care of your people and keep that company culture. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oliver, so my next question to you is on, so how do you perceive, or what would be the things that you perceive as the biggest challenges or risk for investors such as yourself in the African manufacturing industry? Like, what are those risks that you've seen or that you've noticed or that you've heard about? So the point of talking about the risk is so that we are able to find ways to actually de-risk them. So what are those risks? And if you can also speak to some of the ways that you think these companies can de-risk them. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think, one of the biggest risks, I think it's just the ability for these companies to expand globally. And I think the reason why these companies in this panel have been successful is because they've been able to figure that out. But I think, global expansion, the ability to attract customers outside of their immediate region becomes very important. I love what James says about government, and he's very right. You love government, you hate government, and I'm joking there. But I think, government has a big role to play, and they can play that role in Africa, which has not happened yet. In other places like Europe and America, the government, the military complex does play a role, and there's a lot of funding that is coming out of government. There is a lot of money that is coming out of the military. And in order to tap into those funds, you need to have some sort of, very local presence here. So that, again, plays to that expansion strategy. I know many companies that were once European companies that are now either US companies or have, US subsidiaries, and they're able to go after some of that funding here. So that's unfortunately one of those things that gives this region an advantage, and Europe for that matter, over other regions. So I think just the ability to expand globally, James, I think said it well about sort of understanding the cultures of different markets that you're going into. I think that's shouldn't be taken for granted, and that's a risk, and companies that can sort of figure that out sooner as opposed to later, I think is great. The sort of dual use nature of your offerings, meaning the ability to sell both commercially and also to governments, I think is key, a way of sort of diversifying your revenue sources. Michael had some great points as well in sort of being very collaborative and working with other companies. I think here, and as in Africa, it's a very sort of small world, the new space technology world, and just the ability to find partners and do things together, I think is very important and helps you, helps with some of that, risk mitigation that is necessary. So those are some of the things that I would point to. Definitely, as I mentioned, opening up satellite offices, subsidiaries, foreign entities that let you compete more effectively outside of Africa and bring those products to those markets, I think is key. I think everybody mentioned the importance of culture, DNA. There's a certain resilience, I think, that African companies have, and a certain focus on the basics that will benefit them greatly as they go into these other more opulent markets, right? So I think once that happens, they'll be able to capitalize on those opportunities and avoid some of the traps that perhaps other companies would fall into. International partnerships, in a way of whether it's NASA or ESA, again, sort of requires that you expand globally and build relationships with those entities. I think those are all ways to not only just minimize risk, but obviously expand your footprint and grow revenue.
All right, thank you very much. So I can see that people are already asking their questions, and thank you very much to our speakers for answering all the questions that they have. So if you have any other questions, you can please just drop them in the Q&A box. So Mike, the next question is to you. So this is talking about the local talents, how we nurture local talent for our business operation. So in the case of Keep Space, how are you able to nurture local talent to meet the technical requirements of the satellite manufacturing industry? Have you faced any critical challenge while you're building your workforce?
Yeah, I think in terms of talent, we've got two main parts of the business where we need talent, and the one is more on the production side, and one is more on the R&D side. So on the production side, we're talking about good technicians and technologists. Oh, sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
we can.
Someone in the company just connected to my TV and started casting something on my screen, so I can't see anymore. You can hear me, that's fine. Yeah, so on the production side, more technicians and technologists, and then on the R&D side, obviously engineers, electronic, mechanical, software, whatever. And some of them are harder to find than others. Like good embedded software guys are typically harder to find. I think first thing, if you're in Africa, you're in a country where there's not a rich old space industry where there's loads of people available that have space heritage or space experience. So be ready to hire outside of the space industry. You're not gonna hire a mechanical engineer with 5 years of experience in the space industry. It's not gonna happen. So be ready to hire in the automotive industry or in whatever other industry that's high tech enough that the skills transfer to the space industry, and then be ready to upskill people, or not upskill, but train them in the space, the way of the space industry, in terms of the specific way of thinking, in terms of quality and reliability and those kind of things. And then obviously you'll need to train them a bit on the theory as well. Once again, for certain disciplines in the engineering field, it's more relevant to others. So in the control system, if you're a control system engineer, you'll need specific knowledge. If you're an electronic engineer, designing a PC board is designing a PC board. Your requirements might be a bit more stringent, but the engineering stays the same. So there's a bit of technical upskilling that you need to do, and there's a bit of awareness training that needs to be done for the people that you hire to understand what is expected in the space industry. But you can hire from outside of the industry. The thing is, though, you are going to need to invest some time to get them to the point where they're efficiently contributing in your company. So it is important to retain them. And to retain the talent, you need to be focused on a healthy culture in your company. You need to care about your employees. You need to you need to help them to have a growth plan in their career that is satisfying and sufficient to them, which is not easy. That's probably the most difficult part of everything. Because no matter how much you care for your employees, and no matter how much you want to upskill them aggressively, you want to see them succeed and grow. In a small company and in a startup and in a young company, and especially in an environment where you don't want to scale your employees too quickly, or the number of employees too quickly, there aren't always massive long growth paths. The number of layers, the amount of layers in the company is not necessarily that many. So you need to find ways to keep your employees motivated and happy, and look after them in a way that is also sustainable for the business. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Member, just add to that, because it's something I'm a big promoter of. What Mike says is exactly right. Actually, it's not that difficult to find the skills. You just need to tweak them a little bit towards the space environment. And I think a lot of, hopefully there's some startups sitting around this conference thinking, okay, where's my inspiration of them? And I don't know how to get into the market, and I don't know if my technology is good enough. It kind of isn't rocket science. There are probably some rocket scientists also on the call. But if you understand the market, there are certain rules to follow, certain processes, certain tweaks, but the rest is standard electronics, software, mechanics, mechatronics. So you need to just have the courage to believe in yourself and believe you have the right fit for the market, and then go for it. I mean, you talked about the success of these African manufacturing companies. You haven't put a figure on it. The figure I have is, of the 3 people here, 25% of the world's satellites have got equipment on from one of these 3 companies. And 66% of the world's, Elon Musk has just hit 66% of the total operational satellites. And he's vertically integrated. He doesn't really use a supply chain. So if I've done my maths right, that means only 9% of the accessible market has not got African equipment on it. So we've been very successful, not just a little bit successful, but very successful in penetrating the international market. And there's no reason, from my standpoint, while other African companies, if they understand the market and they build the right product at the right price, they can't also join that success.
I will add one more thing, and I like where Mike Alec was going with sort of the recruiting process and finding people close to the industry. But it just shows sort of how extreme you can go with this. And I wish I remember the name of the company, but there's a company, a German company, that is building rocket launchers, and almost all of the parts are from the auto industry. So they have found parts in the auto industry, high-end parts, have put them together off the shelf, and are obviously they're building some of their own, sort of proprietary components, but they have put together rocket engines just doing that. And just goes to show how, if you're creative, you can find industries that are complementary to your own and take advantage of them and build something. So.
All right, thank you very much. So Anna, we're going to circle back to you. Do you have any, so in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, just give like advice to other startups that are on this call in 2 minutes. Thank you.
If I can give a quick advice to startups in this call, and somebody mentioned it on the panel, is keep your focus. If you have a great idea, keep your focus. Yes, collaboration and partnerships are important, and finding investment is important, but that can quickly become a lot of noise and distract you from the focus of what you're actually trying to do. So that would be my advice to new startups and companies trying to make it in the industry. There is a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot that you can do. So if you have an innovative idea, focus on that and pull that through. Make your partnerships, collaborate, but make sure that you do it in a focused way that's going to reach your target and reach your goal.
All right, thank you. Mike, James, and Oliver, do you also have, any advice, again, maybe like a summary or some advice that you want to give to some of these companies on the call? Mine
would be go into the downstream industry and look at services satellites. The upstream industry is expensive, risky, lots of fun, and it really is rocket science in cases. But for Africa, a laptop and a good understanding of the requirements, sitting there doing some coding, generating some nice software that solves a problem on the ground using satellite data is, to me, the way to go.
My advice would be go global early. So if you look at some of the accelerators here in the US, accelerators like the Techstars Space Accelerators, and there are others, this year's cohort is 50% international companies. There are 3 Indian companies, there are 2 Australian companies, I think there's 1 UK company. So, in the same way investors are looking to invest globally, accelerators are looking to accept globally. So reach out.
Thank you. Mike,
yeah, I very much support everything that the other guys said. And maybe just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think relentlessly pursue customer satisfaction, and like, if you're going to make your focus, yes, you'll have some technical focus, but I think your main focus should be who you're selling to, and what do they need, what do they really need, and what are they willing to pay for. So I think really being focused on who the customer is, what they want, and what they'll pay you for, and being aware that that's going to change. What you think might be the right thing now, it might evolve and might change, but stay focused on the customer. That's the most important thing. I think as a, in the space industry, people are very often, it's highly technical, highly intelligent people. They love their tech, they love their product, they're obsessed about it. But they need to get obsessed about the customer if they want to have a successful business.
All right. Thank you very much to our speakers. And with that's the last question we have for today. So one thing I'd like to note to all the audience is, if you have any other questions for any of our speakers, you can kindly reach out to them on LinkedIn or any other social media platforms. They are very, very accessible. I can bet you on that. They are very accessible. So if you have questions for them, if you want their input on anything, please reach out to them directly, and they would be interested to follow up on that. So again, thank you very much to the speakers. We really appreciate the insights they've brought to this webinar. Very, very insightful. Thank you very much for your time. To the audience, till we see you guys again next month.